Chapter 91. They trailed the herd up the Powder River, whose water none of the cowboys liked. A few complained of stomach cramps, and others said the water was affecting their bowel movements. Jasper Fant in particular had taken to watching his own droppings closely. They were coming out almost white, when any came out at all. It seemed an ominous sign. "I've met ladies that wasn't as finicky as you, Jasper," Augustus said, but he didn't bother to tease Jasper very hard. The whole camp was subdued by Dietz's death. They were not missing Dietz so much, most of them, as wondering what fate awaited them in the north. When they crossed the Powder, they could see the Bighorn Mountains looming to the west, not really close, but close enough that anyone could see the snow on top of them. The nights began to be cold, and many of the hands began to regret the fact that they had not bought better coats in Ogallala when they had the opportunity. The discussions around the campfire began to focus mainly on storms. Many of the hands had experienced plains, northers, and the occasional ice storm, but they were South Texas cowhands and had seldom seen snow. A few talked of loping over to the mountains to examine the snow at close range and see what it was like. Newt had always been interested in snow and looked at the mountains often, but in the weeks following Dietz's death he found it difficult to care much about anything, even snow. He didn't pay much attention to the talk of storms and didn't really care if they all froze, herd and hands together. Occasionally, the strange remark Mr. Gus had made came back to him. He didn't know what to make of it. The clear meaning had been that Captain Call was his father. It didn't make sense to Newt. If the captain had been his father, surely he would have mentioned it at some point in the last 17 years. At other times, the question would have excited him, but under the circumstances, he felt too dull to care much. Set beside the fact that Dietz was gone, it didn't seem to matter greatly. Anyway, if Newt had wanted to question the captain about it, he would have had a hard time catching him. The captain took Dietz's job and spent his days ranging far ahead. Usually he only rode back to the herd about dark to guide them to bed ground. Once during the day he had come back in a high lope to report that he had crossed the tracks of about 40 Indians. The Indians had been heading northwest, the same direction they were heading. For the next few days everyone was tense, expecting Indian attack. Several men took alarm at the sight of what turned out to be sagebrush or low bushes. No one could sleep at night, and even those hands who were not on guard spent much of the night checking and rechecking their ammunition. The Irishman was afraid to sing on night duty for fear of leading the Indians straight to them. In fact, night herding became highly unpopular with everyone, and instead of gambling for money, men began to gamble over who took what watch. The midnight watch was the most unpopular. No one wanted to leave the campfire. The men who came in from the watches did so with profound relief, and the men who went out assumed they were going to their deaths. Some almost cried. Needle Nelson trembled so that he could barely get his foot in his stirrup. Jasper Fant sometimes even got off and walked when he was on the far side of the herd, reasoning that the Indians would be less likely to spot him if he was on foot. But a week passed, and they saw no Indians. The men relaxed a little. Antelope became more common, and twice they saw small groups of buffalo. Once the remuda took fright in the night. The next morning, Call found the tracks of a cougar. The country began to change slightly for the better. The grass improved, and occasionally there were clumps of trees and bushes along the riverbed. It was still hot in the afternoon, but the mornings were crisp. Finally, Call decided to leave the valley of the Powder. He felt the threat of drought was over. The grass was thick and wavy, and there were plenty of streams. Not long after leaving the Powder, they crossed Crazy Woman Creek. Every day it seemed there was more snow on the mountains. Traveling became comparatively easy, and the cattle regained most of the flesh they had lost on the hard drive. Almost daily from then on, Call saw Indian sign, but no Indians. It bothered him a little. He had fought Indians long enough not to underrate them, but neither did he exaggerate their capacities. Talk of Indians was never accurate in his view. It always made them seem worse or better than they were. He preferred to judge the northern Indians with his own eyes, but in this case the Indians didn't oblige him. "We're driving 3,000 cattle," Call said. "They're bound to notice us." "They ain't expectin' cattle," Augustus said. "There's never been cattle here before. They're probably just out huntin', trying to lay in enough meat to last them the winter." "I guess we'll meet soon enough," Call said. "If not too soon. They may come bilin' out of them hills and wipe us out any day. Then they'd have enough meat to last the winter. They'd be rich Indians, and we'd be dead fools." "Fools for doing what?" Call asked. "This country's looking better all the time." "Fools for living the lives we've lived," Augustus said. "I've enjoyed mine," Call said. "What was wrong with yours?" "I should have married again," Augustus said. "2 wives ain't very many. Solomon beat me by several hundred, although I've got the same equipment he had. I could have managed 8 or 10 at least. I don't know why I stuck with this scraggly old crew." "Because you didn't have to work, I guess," Call said. "You sat around and we worked." "I was working in my head, you see," Augustus said. "I was trying to figure out life. If I'd had a couple more fat women to lay around with, I might have figured out the puzzle." "I never understood why you didn't stay in Tennessee if your family was rich," Call said. "Well, it was tame, that's why," Augustus said. "I didn't want to be a doctor or a lawyer, and there wasn't nothing else to do in those parts. I'd rather go outlaw than be a doctor or a lawyer." The next day, as they were trailing along a little stream that branched off Crazy Woman Creek, Dish Boggett's horse suddenly threw up its head and bolted. Dish was surprised and embarrassed. It had been a peaceful morning, and he was half asleep when he discovered he was in a runaway, headed back for the wagon. He sawed on the reins with all his might, but the bit seemed to make no difference to the horse. The cattle began to turn too, all except the Texas bull, who let out a loud bellow. Call saw the runaway without seeing what caused it at first. He and Augustus were riding along together, discussing how far west they ought to go before angling north again. "Reckon that horse ate loco weed or what?" Call asked, spurring up to go help hold the cattle. He almost went over the mare's neck, for he leaned forward, expecting her to break into a lope, and the mare stopped dead. It was a shock, for she had been quite obedient lately and had tried no tricks. "Call, look," Augustus said. There was a thicket of low trees along the creek, and a large orangish-brown animal had just come out of the thicket. "My lord, it's a grizzly," Call said. Augustus didn't have time to reply, for his horse suddenly began to buck. All the cowhands were having trouble with their mounts. The horses were turning and running as if they meant to run back to Texas. Augustus, riding a horse that hadn't bucked in several years, was almost thrown. Instead of fleeing, most of the cattle turned and looked at the bear. The Texas bull stood all by himself in front of the herd. Call drew his rifle and tried to urge the hell bitch a little closer, but had no luck. She moved, but she moved sideways, always keeping her eyes fixed on the bear, though it was a good 150 yards away. No matter how he spurred her, the mare sidestepped, as if there was an invisible line on the prairie that she would not cross. "Damnation, there goes the grub," Augustus said. He had managed to subdue his mount. Call looked and saw that the mules were dashing off back toward the powder, Lippy sawing futilely on the reins and bouncing a foot off the wagon seat from time to time. "Captain, it's a bear," Dish Boggett said. He had managed to turn his horse in a wide circle, but he couldn't stop him, and he yelled the words as he raced past. There was confusion everywhere. The remuda was running south, carrying the Spettle boy along with it. 2 or 3 of the men had been thrown, and their mounts were flogging south. The thrown cowhands, expecting to die any minute, though they had no idea what was attacking, crept around with their pistols drawn. "I expect they'll start shooting one another right off," Augustus said. "They'll mistake one another for outlaws if they ain't stopped." "Go stop them," Call said. He could do nothing except watch the bear and hold the mare more or less in place. So far, the bear had done nothing except stand on its hind legs and sniff the air. It was a very large bear, though. To Call, it looked larger than a buffalo. "Hell, I don't care if they shoot at one another," Augustus said. "None of them can hit anything. I doubt we'll lose many." He studied the bear for a time. The bear was not making any trouble, but he apparently had no intention of moving either. "I doubt that bear has ever seen a brindle bull before," Augustus said. "He's a mite surprised, and you can't blame him." "Darn, that's a bit big bear," Call said. "Yes, and he put the whole outfit to flight just by walking up out of the creek," Augustus said. Indeed, the Hat Creek outfit was in disarray, the wagon and the remuda still fleeing south, half the hands thrown and the other half fighting their horses. The cattle hadn't run yet, but they were nervous. Newt had been thrown sky high off the sorrel Clara had given him and had landed painfully on his tailbone. He started to limp back to the wagon, only to discover that the wagon was gone. All that was left of it was Pocampo, who looked puzzled. He was too short to see over the cattle and had no idea there was a bear around. "Is it Indians?" Newt asked. He had not yet seen the bear either. "I don't know what it is," Pocampo said, "but it's something mules don't like." Only the 2 pigs were relatively undisturbed. A sack of potatoes had bounced out of the fleeing wagon, and the pigs were calmly eating them, grunting now and then with satisfaction. The Texas bull was the only animal directly facing the bear. The bull let out a challenging bellow and began to paw the earth. He took a few steps forward and pawed the earth again, throwing clouds of dust above his back. "You don't think that little bull is fool enough to charge that bear, do you?" Augustus asked. "Charging Needle Nelson is one thing. That bear'll turn him wrong side out." "Well, if you want to go rope that bull and lead him to the barn, help yourself," Call said. "I can't do nothing with this horse." The bull trotted forward another few steps and stopped again. He was no more than 30 or 40 yards from the bear. The bear dropped on all fours, watching the bull. He growled a rough, throaty growl that caused 100 or so cattle to scatter and run back a short distance. They stopped again to watch. The bull bellowed and slung a string of slobber over his back. He was hot and angry. He pawed the earth again, then lowered his head and charged the bear. To the amazement of all who saw it, the bear batted the Texas bull aside. He rose on his hind legs again, dealt the bull a swipe with his forepaw that knocked the bull off its feet. The bull was up in a second and charged the bear again. This time it seemed the bear almost skinned him. He hit the bull on the shoulder and ripped a cape-like piece of skin loose on his back, but despite that, the bull managed to drive into the bear and thrust a horn into his flank. The bear roared and dug his teeth into the bull's neck, but the bull was still moving, and soon bear and bull were rolling over and over in the dust, the bull's bellows and the bear's roar so loud that the cattle did panic and begin to run. The hell bitch danced backward, and Augustus's horse began to pitch again and threw him, though Augustus held the rein and managed to get his rifle out of the scabbard before the horse broke free and fled. Then Call found himself thrown too. The hell bitch, cat-like, had simply doubled out from under him. It came at an inopportune moment, too, for the bull and the bear, twisting like cats, had left the creek bank and were moving in the direction of the herd, although the dust the battle raised was so thick no one could see who had the advantage. It seemed to Call, when he looked, that the bull was being ripped to pieces by the bear's teeth and claws. But at least once the bull knocked the bear backward and got a horn into him again. "Reckon we ought to shoot," Augustus said. "Hell, this outfit will run clean back to the Red River if this keeps up." "If you shoot, you might hit the bull," Call said. "Then we'd have to fight the bear ourselves, and I ain't sure we can stop him. That's a pretty mad bear." Pocampo came up, holding his shotgun, Newt a few steps behind him. Most of the men had been thrown and were watching the battle tensely, clutching their guns. The sounds the 2 animals made were so frightening that they made the men want to run. Jasper Fant wanted badly to run. He just didn't want to run alone. Now and then he would see the bear's head, teeth bared, or his great claws slashing. Now and then he would see the bull seem to turn to bunched muscle as he tried to force the bear backward. Both were bleeding, and in the heat the blood smell was so strong that Newt almost gagged. Then it stopped. Everyone expected to see the bull down, but the bull wasn't down. Neither was the bear. They broke apart, circling one another in the dust. Everyone prepared to pour bullets into the bear if he should charge their way, but the bear didn't charge. He snarled at the bull answering with a slobbery bellow. The bull turned back toward the herd, then stopped and faced the bear. The bear rose on his hind legs again, still snarling. One side was soaked with blood. To the men, the bear seemed to tower over them, although 50 yards away. In a minute he dropped back on all fours, roared once more at the bull, and disappeared into the brush along the creek. "Captain, can we go after him?" Soupy Jones said, clutching his rifle. "Go after him on what?" Augustus said. "Have you gone daft, Soupy? You want to chase a grizzly bear on foot after what you've seen? You wouldn't even make one good bite for that bear." The bear had crossed the stream and was ambling along lazily across the open plain. Despite Augustus's cautions, as soon as the men could catch their horses, 5 of them, including Dish Boggett, Soupy, Bert, the Irishman, and Needle Nelson, raced after the bear, still visible, though a mile or more away. They began to fire long before they were in range, and the bear loped toward the mountains. An hour later the men returned, their horses run down, but with no bear trophies. "We hit him, but he was faster than we thought," Soupy explained. "He got in some trees up toward the hills." "We'll get the next one," Bert predicted. "Hell, if he was in the trees, you should have gone in and tapped him with your pistol butt," Augustus said. "That would probably have tamed him." "Well, the horses wouldn't go in them trees," Soupy explained. "I didn't want to either," Alan O'Brien admitted. "If we had gone in the trees, we might not have come out." The mules had run 3 miles before stopping, but because the plain was fairly smooth, the wagon was undamaged. The same could not be said for Lippy, who had bounced so hard at one point that he had bitten his tongue nearly in two. The tongue bled for hours, little streams of blood spilling over his long lip. The remuda was eventually rounded up, as well as the cattle. When the Texas bull calmed down enough so that it was possible to approach him, his wound seemed so extensive that Call at first considered shooting him. He had only one eye, the other having been raked out, and the skin had been ripped off his neck and hung like a blanket over one shoulder. There was a deep gash in his flank and a claw wound running almost the whole length of his back. One horn had been broken off at the skull as if with a sledgehammer, yet the bull still pawed the earth and bellowed when the cowboys rode too close. "It seems a pity to shoot him," Augustus said. "He fought a draw with a grizzly. Not many critters can say that." "He can't walk to Montana with half his skin hanging off his shoulders," Call pointed out. "The flies will get on that wound and he'll die anyway." Pocampo walked to within 50 feet of the bull and looked at him. "I can sew him up," he said. "He might live. Somebody catch him for me." "Yes, rope him, Dish," Augustus said. "It's your job. You're a top hand." Dish had to do it or be embarrassed by his failure for the rest of the trip. His horse didn't want to go near the bull, and he missed 2 throws from nervousness and expected to be killed himself if he did catch the animal. But he finally got a rope over the bull's head and slowed him until 4 more ropes could be thrown on him. Even then, it was all they could do to throw the bull, and it took Pocampo over 2 hours to sew the huge flap of skin back in place. When it was necessary to turn the bull from one side to another, it took virtually the whole crew plus 5 horses and ropes to keep him from getting up again. Then, when the bull did roll, he nearly rolled on Needle Nelson, who hated him anyway and didn't approve of all the doctoring. When the bull nearly rolled on him, Needle retreated to the wagon and refused to come near him again. "I was rooting for the bear," he said. "A bull like that is going to get somebody sooner or later, and it might be me." The next day, the bull was so sore he could barely hobble, and Call feared the doctoring had been in vain. The bull fell so far behind the herd that they decided to leave him. He fell several miles behind in the course of the day. Call kept looking back, expecting to see buzzards in the sky. If the bull finally dropped, they would feast. But he saw no buzzards, and a week after the fight, the bull was in the herd again. No one had seen him return, but one morning he was there. He had only 1 horn and 1 eye, and Pocampo's sewing job was somewhat uneven, the folds of skin having separated in 2 or 3 places. But the bull was ornery as ever, bellowing at the cowboys when they came too close. He resumed the habit of keeping well to the front of the herd. His wounds only made him more irascible. The hands gave him a wide berth. As a result of the battle, night herding became even more unpopular. Where there was one grizzly bear, there could be others. The men who had been worrying constantly about Indians began to worry about bears. Those who had chased the wounded bear horseback could not stop talking about how fast he had moved. Though he had only seemed to be loping along, he had easily run off and left them. "There ain't a horse in this outfit that bear couldn't catch if he wanted to," Dish contended. The observation worried Jasper Fant so much that he lost his appetite and his ability to sleep. He lay awake in his blankets for 3 nights clutching his gun, and when he couldn't avoid night herding, he felt such anxiety that he usually threw up whatever he ate. He would have quit the outfit, but that would only mean crossing hundreds of miles of bear-infested prairie alone, a prospect he couldn't face. He decided if he ever got to a town where there was a railroad, he would take a train. no matter where it was going. P.I., too, found the prospect of bears disturbing. "If we strike any more, let's all shoot it at once," he suggested to the men repeatedly. "I guess if enough of us hit one it'd fall," he always added. But no one seemed convinced, and no one bothered to reply.